Lance Lambert. Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Vehicle Show. We are in El Segundo, California at the Automobile Driving Museum. We are here through the good graces of Stanley Zimmerman and Earl Rubenstein, a couple of great guys who oversee this whole collection. We're going to learn about these cars, and you're going to get a close look at some very special cars. But to begin with, a very special guy. Come on in here, Stan. How you doing?
How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having us here again.
My pleasure.
We filmed this at your old facility probably, what, 4 years ago or so? And you have...
Yeah, probably was.
Yeah.
It's a lot different than this facility.
You have grown.
Yes, we have prospered for it.
Well, give the viewers a little bit of a history how this all came together.
The Automobile Driving Museum started about 6 years ago, and we're a public 501c3. And it was an idea that I had that goes back about 30 years when I went to car shows, and everybody had their signs up saying, "Look and don't touch." And I was had a rumble seat Roadster, Packard Roadster. Surely wasn't going to win a lot of prizes, so I said, "Come on, climb in." So particularly young children that would climb into the rumble seat, I said, "Someday I'll sponsor a museum where people can sit in the cars and go for rides in them." And that's what the mission of the Automobile Driving Museum is. We preserve history, we preserve literature for the future, but mainly we encourage people to come and sit in the cars and go for a ride.
And I understand on your website you post which cars you're going to have available for riding in on the weekends, and people can go to the website and go, "Yeah, I'd love to ride in a 50 Studebaker or a 32 Ford," and they call you up and come on out. Is that right?
Actually, we ask people to call us early in the week, preferably on a Tuesday if they have a preference in a car, so that our mechanic would come over and check the car out for safety. And then that car will be out on the weekend, usually on a Sunday, and they can get a ride in it. And then we select some cars also to go for rides in.
Well, I might be wrong in this, but let's start by looking at a car that I bet you don't offer a whole lot of rides in because it is so significantly historical.
Well, every car that we have, we're sort of in the showroom here, and these are the only cars that you can't go for a ride in, but we have a duplicate of them. But we have not yet been able to find a duplicate of this special car, but we are looking for it.
Okay, well, let's go look at the Eleanor car, and it's not the Mustang Eleanor car. It's even more special than that. I've seen 32 Plymouths before, not many of them, but I certainly have never seen one that looks like this, and I know this is the only one with the history that this one has. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, this is a 1932 Plymouth custom body by Brewster, and it's a town car, which means the chauffeur sits outside and the passengers sit inside. This car was built for Eleanor Roosevelt, and she had the car in Warm Springs, Georgia. Now, Eleanor didn't drive, so she didn't need a chauffeur, but she also had meetings in her car, so she needed privacy. Her husband was running for president as a Democrat. Well, Democrats don't ride around in the Depression in Cadillacs and Lincolns, they ride in Plymouths. So she had this car built for her by the Brewster Body Company, custom body company. The car has been in various collections. It's been in our collection for a while. Before that, it was at the Imperial Palace. And it's unique because the interior of the car has never been restored. It is still the original interior that Eleanor Roosevelt sat on. It's the only Plymouth recognized by the Classic Car Club as a classic. All the other Plymouths are just regular driver cars. They're special interest, they're collector cars, but the Brewster is something special.
So just this one is recognized by that.
That's right. You go there, and when you look at the roster of the cars that they recognize as classics, you'll see lots of Packards, lots of Pierce Arrows, one Plymouth. This one.
What's the running gear on it?
It's a four-cylinder L-head engine. It is a floor shift, 3 gears forward, 1 gear in reverse, and it runs pretty well, actually. We do take it out, but we are not very anxious to take it on a long trip.
Well, the significance of this is amazing. Brewster, I know they made a lot of custom bodies for Ford, but many Plymouths?
Now, as far as we know, this is the only one.
This is the only one.
The only Brewster-bodied Plymouth.
So this is kind of one of one.
One of one.
1930 Stutz, but a very unusual 1930 Stutz for a pretty interesting reason. Tell us about this car.
Well, first of all, it's a Monte Carlo. And there were a lot of Stutz Monte Carlos, and that's this lowered top and extended hood. But the body on this car was custom made by Wyman. Wyman was a French body maker who came to the United States and opened a shop in Indiana, and that's where Stutzes were made. And the Wyman body is unusual. At the time in 1930, most bodies had a wood frame and then either wood or metal on them. This is not made that way. This car, they take and they make a wood frame, and then they put wire on it, cotton, and they cover the cotton with what they called leatherette. We would call it vinyl today. So it's soft. If you go and touch the car, like I'm touching it now, it is soft. Now that made the car lighter so it could go faster, but mainly it made it a lot quieter. It didn't rattle.
What was the survival rate on cars like this with that sort of a...
Very low. Of all the Stutzes made, only 21 Wyman-bodied Stutzes have survived, and only 3 1930 Monte Carlos. This one here is the only one in California. There's one in Illinois and one in New York, and that's it. Just 3 30s have survived.
The power plant on these were pretty hot cars, weren't they, back then?
Well, no, it's a Continental engine, straight 8, but it has 32 valves. That's why they call it a DV32, although it's 4 valves per cylinder. And so that'll get the car moving along pretty well, but it's not a racing car. I mean, this isn't, you have to consider that the car was made a little lighter just to get it to go faster. It was easier to do that than to soup up the engine.
I can remember when I was just a little squirt, my family had a 51 Nash just like this one, and the seats folded down in this, and we went to the ocean. My mother, father, brother, sister, and I all slept in this at the same time.
That would have been crowded.
Very crowded. Very, very unique car. Tell us about this.
Well, when I was in high school, no father would let his daughter go out with you if you had a Nash.
Yeah, yes.
The Nashes were unique in that the seats folded down and became a bed. So we'd take them to the drive-in theater, but the girls weren't with us.
You wish they were.
Yeah, I sure would.
These were very unique design, even for the time. How did they go over in the market? Were these pretty popular cars?
No. A lot of the cars were used by government because the Nash had reduced the price in them so that they could compete in auctions for government use. No, they really were not popular. They were this bathtub look was ahead of its time. The car itself is a very well-running car. It has 6-cylinder engine, economy to run. Handles well, but didn't sell well.
The folding bed seems like one of those things that's like, well, why doesn't everybody do this? Why didn't Ford make one? Why didn't Plymouth make one? It makes so much sense.
I guess it's the reputation of a car with a bed in it. It's just that, although if you look at some of the modern cars, if you push your seat all the way forward in the front seat and lower the back, you can turn it into a bed. My wife has one, a Mercedes that does that.
At one time in the past, Nashes, I think, were considered just another good car that was out on the market, and then they slowly kind of became Grandma and Grandpa cars or less desirable cars, or why do you think that happened?
Well, the small independent car manufacturers really had a problem because they didn't have the economies of scale, and it cost them more to make a car than the big 3 at the time. And so they tried to merge with others. They did come out with the first American compact car, although it was the Nash Metropolitan, although it was actually made by Austin in England.
Right.
So they did try that, but with all of the problems we can see today with cars being manufactured and competition, Nash just couldn't compete. It's unfortunate too because here we are in El Segundo, and Nashes were made in El Segundo.
We have been joined by Earl Rubenstein. Earl is a curator here at the museum.
How do you do there, Lane?
Thank you for joining us. Earl, I am standing next to something I've never seen before, I've never heard of. I have no idea what this is.
Well, this is a Supersonic. It's a one-of. It really wasn't designed as a car. It was a race car designed by Joel Thornton in Burbank, California in 1938. And he wanted to race on the Bonneville Salt Flats against Mercedes Auto Union DKW. And it really had two Miller engines in it on a specialized chassis with a single bubble top for the driver to sit in the center. When the war broke out, he decided to abandon the project, and it was sold to Lou Fagel of the Twin Coach Bus Company out of Kent, Ohio. Lou Fagel decided to make an arrangement with the Hudson Motor Car Company and do a futuristic design in the car. So what they did is they mounted it on a Hudson chassis with the Hudson Straight 8. They widened the body from a point here and at the same point on the other side, provided a full top to flow into the back of the car, and then after they put all that together, they drove it at the 1948 Indy 500 as a futuristic car. Then the car sort of disappeared for a while, and nobody's seen it. It was found in 1980-82 by Rob DeMars up in San Francisco, and it had a Ford V8 in it, bucket seats, tilt steering wheel, and he didn't know what it was, and he started to gut the car. And then all of a sudden said, well, there's something unusual about the car. It's all aluminum and everything else about it. And he did the research and found out this history that I'm telling you now. One of the side stories to the whole thing is a gentleman here in Southern California who restores radio, Steve Engel, came in one day and recalled reading in the Hudson Digest an article by one of the engineers discussing this car. So he called him up and got more information on it, and then took pictures of it, sent it to the engineer, who was now about 90 some odd years old, and he said, yes, this is the car that he worked on at the Hudson Studios in about 1952, due to the fact that it had a fire under the dashboard, and he had to rewire it at the design studios up at Michigan with the Hudson Motor Car Company. So those are some of the little tidbits that we found out about this particular car. Mm-hmm. It's a very neat little car.
You're going to restore this, is the plan?
Well, Bob DeMars is looking for a partner with $500,000 to come along and be his partner and do the restoration, if he can find a partner to do this.
So any of the viewers out there with an extra $500,000, they'll be able to contact you and...
Correct. We'll put them in with Bob, and then they can restore the car.
I'd help out, but I'm just a little short on that.
You don't have your lunch money when you do that.
Quite a lunch. A 36 Packard, pretty exciting. A little different color than I've seen before. Tell us about this.
This, as you said, is a 1936 Packard Standard 8. In the Packard line, in the senior series, there were 3 engines, a Standard 8, a Super 8, and a V12. This is the Standard 8 model on the 134-inch wheelbase with 320 cubic inches to the engine. The color is not a 36 color. The color is a 1937 color that comes from an ad that was put out by the Packard Motor Car Company. And we liked it so much that we put it on the 36 car. It just brightens it up with the yellow wheels and the Chinese red look. It just makes the car much more exciting than a regular, dark blue, black, or burgundy color, which everybody tends to paint on the car. It's a very popular car because it's a roadster, and it has the rumble seat in the back, where a lot of people like to get in, especially the kids, when they come to our museum and see these cars and sit in them. We recently did this paint job about 2 years ago. It was an older restoration that had a cream color paint job on it that was beginning to show wear. So in selecting it, we did this Chinese red, which is pretty outstanding.
Mm-hmm. This is an 8-cylinder car?
8-cylinder car.
Performance on it is adequate, or is it perky? Is it peppy?
More than adequate. You drive this car. I've taken this car up to the Gold Country in California and Highway 49. I've been through Highway 5 on this, going up the Joaquin Valley, and it's a wonderful car to cruise along at about 60, 65 miles an hour all day long. Goes up and down the hills with effortless motion. It's really a nice riding car. Of course, if you had the Super 8 or the 12, there's just that much more power and torque to move you along.
probably the first customizer, person to alter the style of a car, whatever you want to call them, whatever they were called back in the 30s and 40s. The guy that really got my interest is Dutch Darrin. He definitely has his hand on this car. Tell us about Dutch Darrin.
Well, Dutch was a very flamboyant designer. He really started his work in Europe and worked through Hibbert and Darrin and Fernandez and Darrin. And then as the war clouds loomed in Europe, he left and came back to America about 1935. And Dutch, who is a designer, his first known creation of the Darrin designs was on a 37 Ford for Chester Morris's wife. After that, Dick Powell and Clark Gable saw this car, and they wanted them on Packards. And the first two Packard Darrins were in 1938 Packards on a 120 chassis with a wood cowl, which is this area up in here. After the first two, they decided to do them differently, and they made a aluminum cowl that came in here and then mounted the windshield on it. The first series of Darrins were 16 built by Dutch, and those were done up in West Hollywood and Hollywood. And by 1940, after those 16, he decided to try to get the Packard Motor Car Company to put these on as part of the sales operation from the company. So when they had the 40 models for display on one of the rooftops right there in Detroit, he had one of his Darrins down in the street. And there were more people coming down to the street to see his Darrin going ooh and ah, and not going up to see the regular Packard models, that the management came down and they worked out a deal, and in 1940 they did build these in Detroit at the Connersville plant. So there's about 44 of these made, and there are probably about 50 of them around because they've been emulated and copied on the same Packard chassis, the late model reproductions. And then in 41, in 42, they were built at Scoville and Sayers in Cincinnati, Ohio, on those chassis. These are very popular cars, very good to drive. And when you drive down the street in one of these cars, everybody looks at you, and everybody gives you the thumbs up and toots their horn at you to look at this. The lines on this car are just amazing when you stand back. Difficult to do in here, but when you're outside and you stand back and look at the flow of these lines, you could just see the ability and the design quality that Mr. Darrin had in doing this vehicle.
Probably the most distinctive thing on it is the Darrin dip.
Correct.
Which, besides being a signature thing that Dutch did, it really was effective style-wise. The performance on this, just stock running gear, nothing special?
For the 40s, they were built with the 180 engine, 356 cubic inches on a 127-inch wheelbase. There were a couple that were made on the 120 wheelbase, on the shorter one, with the 120 engines in them. And all the earlier Darrins, the 16 that were built in California, were built on 120 chassis. All the later ones, or the majority of them, were done on the 127 with the 356 engine, the big one.
Mm-hmm. Within the collection, this is known as the Stalin Packard.
Correct.
All right, tell us about that.
Okay, well, this is a 1936 Packard, 7-passenger Phaeton, and the history is that in 1935, the Packard Motor Car Company got a letter from the Russian government requesting 20 Phaetons. Now, the Packard Motor Car Company had decided not to produce any more Phaetons after 35. That is, a Phaeton is without windows. It's a side curtain model. It's not the roll-up windows in it. So because they did get this letter and decided to go into production for the Russian government of 20 Phaetons, they did domestic Phaetons as well. And that's why you find 1936 Packard Phaetons in the collections around the states here, but no 37s. So this is a special car in as much as it came back from Russia, and it was paid by the Russian government at a restorer, I believe in Connecticut, who completed the restoration on the car. Then it was sent to a collector. It was bought by a collector in Georgia, and we bought it from that collector. And we have that documentation from the restorer, that it was paid by the Russian government. So it's the only surviving known one from the Russian government.
And I think this is just a rumor, but correct me if it's actually true, that Russia ordered a lot of Packards and then they bought the dies, or they knocked off copies, or there are cars over there that look very, very similar to Packards. Is there any truth to that?
Well, there's several theories of the whole thing that go together. That's Roosevelt, in order to be friendly with Russia at the time, sold the dies from the Packard Motor Car Company because they liked Packard cars.
When your guests going through the museum here realize that this was one of the Stalin cars, what kind of reaction do you get from them? Is it oohs and ahs, or is it bad memories of the war, or everything?
No, mostly oohs and ahs. Really, did he own this car personally? Did he ride in the car? We really don't know, but we say yes, he did. And they were impressed by it. They say, oh, can we sit in the car too? Sure. And they, have this look of surprise on their face.
Stan, thank you very much for having us here as your guest. It's a wonderful facility.
It was our pleasure to have you. We welcome you to come again, and we welcome those that see your wonderful program to come again to the Automobile Driving Museum.
Okay. And Earl, if they want to do that, how do they go about it? How do they contact you?
Contact us on the net, www.automobiledrivingmuseum.org. And all the information is right there.
Okay. And amazingly enough, it's right on the screen right now as people are watching.
Oh, okay, that's good.
All right. Okay, Stan, I know you have to go back to work. We're going to head off to Bob's Big Boy in Burbank, have a burger and some fries while we're sitting in this, so we'll see you soon.
Have a good 50s lunch.
Okay, thanks. One of the things that we need to remember in the hobby is these are automobiles and they are to be driven. Well, we are here at the Automobile Driving Museum in Los Angeles. This is a collection of cars that are open to the public, and the thing that's unique about this collection is these aren't dusty cars that sit here for 15, 20 years and are never started. These cars actually run and are driven on a regular basis. It's kind of the point of the whole museum, along with making these cars accessible to the general public. We're going to take a look at some of these cars. You're going to meet a couple of people that have a lot of information to share about the cars, so hope you enjoy it. Every museum needs a curator. Well, here we have the curator right here, Earl Rubenstein. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Some fantastic cars here. It's just an amazing collection.
Oh, we like it. We think we have a very unusual collection. It's sort of eclectic, not covering any one special car, but a lot of different things for different reasons.
And this car behind us, what a spectacular car, and one that has a lot of really famous styling cues in it.
Definitely so. This behind us is a 1940 Packard Darrin, designed by Dutch Darrin. Darrin has the famous dip to the side of his cars, which cuts down the car and gives it that rakish styling for speed and aerodynamics, which they were looking for in that year, that sporty look. And this car this year was in the Rose Parade on January 1st with the Tournament of Roses, and the Grand Marshal rode in the John Williams. It's quite a machine, this Packard, with a 356 engine.
I think of this era of Packard as being more of kind of a stately, gentleman, country club kind of vehicle. This has a real sporting look to it.
Definitely so. Darrin was building these cars in Hollywood on 120 chassis starting in 1938, selling them to the Hollywood set. And he went in 1939 to the Packard Zoo in Detroit, parked it out in front, and was trying to get their attention with the cars. And all the oohs and the ahs were from the people looking at his car out in front and not the Packard's inside. And the directors came out and they saw the car and they said, "Come on inside, Dutch, let's talk about this." And then they went and built them at the Connors plant in Indiana in 1940, and this is the 40 Darrin. But the 37, 8, and 9s were built in Hollywood by Rudy Stossel and Dutch Darrin individually.
Earl, this particular car, I was surprised to find out that it is a Plymouth because it is so classy looking. Not that Plymouths aren't cool, but you don't think of them to look like this.
That's correct. This is a rather unusual car. This was designed and built for Eleanor Roosevelt. And from what we understand is that in 1932, the heart of the Depression, Eleanor didn't want to be ostentatious by driving a great big Packard. So she ordered it on a Plymouth chassis, 112-inch wheelbase, but yet she has the privacy in the back in the town car, and it was built by the Brewster Company, which wasn't really the Brewster Company. It was really owned by Rolls-Royce in Springfield at that time, and they were building the Brewster bodies. And this was done by them for Eleanor Roosevelt. We find it a very rare car. It's only one kind like this.
I know Brewster made bodies, custom bodies for Ford. Did they make them for anybody that provided them a chassis?
What happened is after Brewster closed down and sold out to Rolls-Royce in 27, the Rolls-Royce and Brewster group that were operating at that time bought about 150 chassis from Ford, and they built those flared fendered V radiators on Brewster Fords, and that's all a special body that was done on Fords by Brewster at their factory.
I love Kaisers and I love Frasers, and you have a Fraser here.
Yes, this is a unique car and very rare. I understand from the gentleman who we bought the car from last year at the Hershey auction that only 82 Fraser convertibles were built, and what they did is took a sedan and cut them down for the convertibles. And we understand that there may be only one or two in the whole country left, and this is one of them that we've got here for our museum. And we feel very honored to have this car here and show it because it's something that you wouldn't find after World War II as a four-door convertible sedan. Of course, back in '62, Lincoln made a convertible sedan, but this was right after the war. And the hood emblem on the car, just above the grille, says "Let it be driven" in French under the monocle there. So this is a unique car in as much as it's a savior of one of 82 that were made practically. We find it nice to have.
What was the relationship between Kaiser and Fraser?
Well, to my understanding, Kaiser and Fraser were partners, and they built the Liberty ships during World War II.
And then as far as the automobile, I mean, you had the Kaiser Fraser, and then they separated out? Is that correct?
They stopped the Fraser model, I think, in '50, and Kaiser continued on the model Kaiser. Of course, Kaiser and Fraser were still partners until '54, and in, I think, '51, Darrin designed the later Kaiser, and if you look at the Kaisers from '51 through '54, they have that Darrin dip on the side, the same as our Darrin car that we talked about earlier.
Like the Henry J with a little dip in it.
Henry J, that's correct. I don't know if he was involved with the Henry J, but I know the overall Kaiser, he was involved in their design.
It takes several people to operate a facility like this, and another one of the operators here is Stanley Zimmerman. Stanley, thanks for being on the show.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to have you as our guests.
Thank you. How did this all come about?
Well, Earl Rubenstein and I go to car shows, and particularly me. People would say, "Look but don't touch" at all the museums and at places where we showed the cars. And I thought that was not the experience people should have, particularly children. And so I would invite them to sit in the car, climb into a rumble seat, and they were getting a different experience when they could sit behind the wheel. And so last year we started the Automobile Driving Museum. We're open once a week with our volunteers. People can come in, look at our cars. They can come in and sit in them. And then they can make arrangements to get a ride in one.
Is there a particular type of automobile that you seek out for this collection?
Well, we look for cars that we're mostly American cars and sports cars and British sports cars. But we look for cars that were popular 30 years to 75 years ago, that people remember as their first car or the car they wanted to have. And so there is a mixture in the museum. We do spend a little extra time trying to locate orphan cars where the manufacturer's gone out of business.
The car right next to us here, a beautiful Packard. What's the story on this car?
This car is a 1929 standard 8 Packard Phaeton. It's a 7-passenger. We've had as many as 9 people in it. It has a back seat that you can sit 3 and a front seat that you can sit 3, and it has 2 jump seats I can show you that you add on. Now this is a jump seat, and it will fold down. It has 2 windshields so that the people in the back seat don't get too much of the wind from the front. Now this is a Packard made in the United States but made for export. It was exported to Australia. It's right-hand drive because the Australians drive like the British on the wrong side of the road. And because it was for export, it's a 12-volt car, not 6 of its vintage, which makes it more compatible with current cars. And it is a good older restoration and a fun car to have. Particularly, it's nice on a right-hand drive when you stop at a stoplight. You're sitting next to the other driver, so you can have a nice conversation.
Answer all those questions.
Yeah.
A style of car that still amazes me that it didn't just conquer the automotive world where the airflows are just such a gorgeous car. This is a really fine example.
This is a 1935 Chrysler Airflow sedan. Airflows were way ahead of their time, maybe too much ahead of their time. They were designed in a wind tunnel. That's why you see this rounded look. They have independent suspension, overdrive, hydraulic brakes. But in their time, they were considered ugly. The public was not ready for a car like this, and they didn't sell well. So after a few years, Chrysler quit making them, although Chrysler used the things they learned about the airflow in the design of their other cars. And in the 30s and early 40s, Chrysler products were known for their reliability.
The quality of this car, this particular model, was it a little better quality than the rest of the Chrysler products? Were they trying to make this for the real upscale market?
In the mid-30s, all of the Chrysler products, whether you bought a Dodge, a Plymouth, or a DeSoto, were high quality. They were the quality builder of the time. They built a very reliable car. I don't think that their Chrysler was made any better than any of their other cars. We like them all. We like all the Chrysler products of that time period.
Very pretty car, and the grille on this is really unique.
Yes, this car was a 1932 Packard 900 coupe. It's got a rumble seat, and it has this grille that slopes to the bottom. The slang term for this car is the shovel nose. That's how people know it. Packard made this during the Depression as their first attempt at making a lower price car than their custom cars. They were not successful with this. Later they came out with their 120, which was successful. These cars are very rare, considered very pretty. I do think they're very pretty, and they're hard to come by. It takes a long time to find, particularly a coupe. There are more convertibles that survived, and very few of the sedans did.
And the top of it being a padded top like that on a coupe, not totally unique, but kind of unusual.
Yes, it is. They did that at that time. Now, you could actually, during the summer season, you could remove this padded top like a Carson top is removed. I don't know anybody that does it, though. That's just too much trouble. It is basically on the same frame as the convertible with the top attached to it. Riding in the rumble seat is windy, but with the top up, it's helpful rather than in a convertible.
So there's probably not much chance of you and I pulling the top off this today and taking it for a ride.
Not this year either. No.
Or next year.
I don't think we'll ever take the top off of it.
Stan, I have always loved Studebakers. Every year Studebaker ever made, but I really like the Bullet Nose series. They are fantastic. Can you tell us about this car?
Well, this is a 1950 Studebaker Land Cruiser. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's the best restoration I've ever seen of one. And who you really should be talking to is our docent, Dan Skidmore, who is the former president of the Studebaker Club and the restorer of this car. Dan, where are you?
As if by magic, here's Dan right here. Thanks, Dan. Dan, this is like he says, maybe the best one I've ever seen. Tell us about the car.
This car, I I guess the base place to start is, where did they start? They built about 25,000 of these in 1950, which was Studebaker's biggest year. And this is the top of the line. It has every option. This particular car was made in April 1950 in the Los Angeles plant, and it's the first of the automatics, the Studebaker automatic.
Tell me about the grill. I noticed that we see a lot of these restored where the grill section is chromed or painted black, and this is painted body color, and you taught me a little something there.
Yes. The body color is the factory color. They had two types. The early ones had chrome-plated ones that were painted body color. Later in the year, they went to aluminum and painted those body color. If you take the car apart and you find they're chrome, I can't blame people for leaving them that way, but because they're awful hard to repaint.
So if you go to a car show and you see a 50 and the grill, what'd you call it, the chicken?
Call it egg crate.
The egg crate area is chrome. It's wrong. It should have been painted.
From the factory, they were painted, yes. Okay, right. The other thing that's different about new ones and old ones during the year, they changed the headlight covers from body color to chrome. And if you get an early one, I found out the hard way, I did unpainted one or unchromed one, you cannot chrome that material. So you have to find a chrome one.
This particular body style, there seemed to be a lot of, which way is it going, and a lot of teasing about Studebakers as I was growing up, this particular body style. But the fact is, you referred to it earlier, that they sold a lot of these cars despite people making jokes.
Right. This was their biggest year. They sold 250,000 cars about that year. And the coming and going, I think, only applies to the Starlight Coupe. And now that would be the one with the wraparound back windows, which, of course, this doesn't have.
One of the most fun cars that I've ever owned was a beautiful burgundy or maroon Avanti with a beige interior of, I believe they called it fawn. Well, looked awful similar to this one.
Yes, I would think it would, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this.
This is a stock 1963 R2 Avanti. It's got the 290 horsepower engine with a supercharger. And it's been modified with a Hurst shifter instead of a factory stock one. I've had it since 1976, and I took it apart and put it back together too.
I know when they came out with these, it wasn't so much that they didn't sell because the public didn't like them. The public loved them, but they just couldn't supply enough of them in enough time.
The problem they had was that they had in Ashtabula, Ohio, built the fiberglass parts, which were supposed to come assembled to the South Bend plant. And the parts that they sent did not assemble correctly. So the Studebaker had to resort to going to Ohio to try to straighten them out, and meanwhile trying to put what they had together. In the meantime, they lost all their orders.
When they brought one of these, I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and they had one of these at the showroom downtown Tacoma. There was a mob around it. There were people 3 deep around the car. It created such an exciting fervor.
Yes, I was part of that crowd, except that I had 4 little kids, and we ended up buying a station wagon. I kept saying, why don't you make the Avanti in a station wagon? But they never did.
Well, they did make a 4-door in the Avanti too, but no station wagon.
1990 and 91, yeah.
What kind of reaction do you get? I know when I had mine, a lot of people didn't know what it was. They didn't recognize it.
That's true. Most people don't know. When you say it's a Studebaker, they say, really, I didn't know Studebaker made a car that looks like that. And then you say it's an Avanti, and they say, well, I didn't know they made that either. And I would say that probably 90% of the public has never heard of the car.
And I know you've had, like I have, had the opportunity to meet Tom Kellogg, who, though Raymond Loewy gets most of the credit, Tom is the guy that put pen to paper on these cars.
Yeah, there were actually 4 designers. Kellogg was the youngest one of them, and there's Andrews and John Epstein were the other 2 designers that were working with Loy in Palm Springs. This was a 6-week project for them. And Tom was very enthusiastic, and he was young, and he also did the new Avanti that's out now. He updated the design. I didn't know whether you knew that or not.
Yeah. Any chance that I might be able to get a ride in this?
Absolutely. You can drive it if you like.
All right, you heard him. I'd like to thank Earl and Stan and Dan here at the Automobile Driving Museum in Los Angeles. And what did I tell you in the beginning? What I told you was the point of these cars is they are driven. So, hey, I'm going driving.
Hi, I'm Ellen Byars. I'm in Los Angeles, California at the Automotive Driving Museum. Let's start off by talking to the two men who created this museum, Stanley Zimmerman and Earl Rubenstein. Hi, Stanley. Hi, Earl. Stanley, can you tell us why you created this museum?
We used to go to car shows, and you go to car shows, everybody says, look at them, but don't touch them. And we thought that perhaps a better experience for people would be as if they could actually get in cars and go for rides in them. So decided that when I got the opportunity, I would open a museum with a different mission. The mission being that little kids could come. Now, if they're really small in California, you can't because of some laws, but anybody 10 years of age and older can go for a ride in these cars. We schedule them, and then they go out for a ride. And if you're under 10, you can sit in them and get your picture taken. And we feel that that will encourage a new generation of car collectors and car fanciers, and that's why we started the museum.
And Earl, what has been everyone's reaction, like the people that do come and check out the museum, especially the kids?
Well, most of the people are very shocked, first of all, to find this place and be aware that it's now open, and to be able to get in and handle the cars, touch them, sit in them. They're really pleased that they don't have to stand back and just gawk at the cars. They can now sit in them.
Wonderful. Thanks. Well, let's go take a look.
All right.
This is Stan's 65 Studebaker Wagoneer. Stan, I understand this is your baby, so tell us about it, please.
I bought this car about 30 years ago from a neighbor of mine, and I used it. In fact, this car is an unusual car. It was the last Studebaker made. It was made in Canada because Studebaker had gone out of the car business, although they're still in business doing stuff for the government like rockets and such. And it's unusual for its time because the roof slides back and you can lower the seats and the car becomes a pickup truck rather than a station wagon. In the ads, they used to show this car moving a refrigerator, and actually I did move one time, and I moved a refrigerator in the car. It was very freaky. There's a step to stand up on when you're using it as a station wagon, and it is powered by a Chevrolet engine because Studebaker had not been making engines in their engine companies, so they used Chevrolet. So that makes it very easy to maintain because all the mechanical parts are. It's an excellent car to drive. Easy, air-conditioned. It's power steering. It's like a modern car. And it creates a lot of fun, particularly when you pile a bunch of kids standing in the back.
Stan, I understand this Deuce Coupe was put together 5 years ago from a kit. Can you tell us a little about it?
Yes. The reason we used a kit, or actually the car was purchased, assembled, is that kit cars have a better suspension, but they take the form of a 32 Ford. And 32 Fords were a very popular car to make hot rods out of in the 40s and 50s, and they're sort of a classic. So when you make a car for running on a drag strip to get speed, it's good to buy the kits that look like 32 Fords. But actually the suspension is different. It has a Chevrolet short block that's been souped up. And this particular one has got a nitrous oxide booster so that it doesn't run solely on gasoline. It is used in order to get the maximum speed you can in a quarter of a mile. This car has done as much as 120 miles an hour when powered by nitrous oxide.
Stan, this is a 28 Studebaker, and I understand it's very primitive compared to modern cars. Can you tell us why?
Yes, this is what's called a GH Commander Big 6. Studebaker developed this engine actually in the teens and started installing it in cars in the early 20s. And in 1928 was the last year they used that engine. The engine is what's called has a split in it. The cylinders can be unbolted from the main part of the engine where the bearings are. The bearings are poured Babbitts. And when you rebuild an engine like this, you have to do what's called shim the bearings. It's a technique that no modern mechanic knows. Somebody did train me. I did rebuild this engine and do the shimming of the Babbitts in it. The car runs well. It's not very fast. It has mechanical brakes. Its shock absorbers are tied to the car with leather belts. So it really goes back a ways. And it takes some training to drive it. I bought it when I didn't know any better, when I first got into the hobby about 35 years ago at an auction. If I knew what I knew now, I probably wouldn't have bought it. But also, if I know what I know now about the fun of this car, I'd buy it.
Well, I understand you got this 37 Packard from a man in Atlanta along with another Packard. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, about 4 years ago, we acquired this convertible sedan, this 37, and a 36 Phaeton, which is down at the other end of the museum, from a gentleman in Atlanta who is a dealer. We purchased this 37 specifically so that we could use it as a driving car to go in conjunction to our 36 convertible sedan, which I'll show you later. This one we take out on tours. We use it for taking children in it and showing them what the hobby's like and so forth. And just recently we got it back from the upholstery shop and had a new top put on it and a new boot made for it. And as you can see, it really fits well, and the top is nice and taut on the car, and the car has a little elegance to it that you can't get away from. That's the Packard automobile.
Earl, this is a 1935 Chrysler Airflow, and why is this design unique?
Well, this was very radical for the design of cars in 1935. The three designers for Chrysler really started this design concept in an air tunnel, with the airflow design patterned after the airships of like the Hindenburg and so forth. And when it came to the public in 34 in the first series of design, it just wasn't accepted by the public as a sales item. They thought it was sort of ugly, and it really never took off. And 35, 36, and 37, they made them. The productions were low, and then they dropped the design and went back to the conventional design on cars. Although they're wonderful cars to drive in, they're excellent road cars, they handle beautifully, they're unibody construction, they have no wood frame in them, they're very advanced for their time. Unfortunately, the public didn't accept it.
What about this Mustang here to the left?
Mustang's one of the standard 1965 Mustangs two-door fastbacks. What's different about this one, it's a six-cylinder with a triple carburetor setup. However, it didn't come from the factory that way. It was done by the people who did it in restoration. Ford did offer the three carburetor setups on the six cylinders if you ordered them that way. And they're very hard to find an original three-barrel, but this is a duplication of it right here.
Earl, this 1957 Lincoln is original, and it has a very interesting story. Tell us about it.
Well, this Lincoln Premier convertible is original with 60,000 miles on it. Carlo Amato owned the car initially. He was the mechanic for the museum. And Carlo's brother, Tommy Amato, was Wayne Newton's manager for many, many years. And Carl, when he was up there in Reno years ago, picked this up when it was about 2 years old on a used car lot, drove it only on the weekends, and babied it, and just recently sold it here to the museum. And it has the original interior, which is the pink, black, and white, which is sort of indicative of the tricolor 50s era. It's a real special car. We like it.
It's beautiful. This Packard has an amazing story historically, and this is also the other Packard that you purchased in Atlanta.
That's correct.
Tell us about it.
Well, this car we call our Stalin car. That's a 1936 Standard 8 Packard 7-passenger Phaeton. Now, the Phaeton is different than the convertible sedan we saw before, in as much as it has the side curtains. If I can show you over here, these are the side curtains that go on the car. This door here is without the curtains, no windows, no roll-ups. These are the Dawson plugs to receive the curtains. Now, this car was exported in 36 to Russia at the request of the Russian government that liked Packards. Now, we're tracking down the history of the export, but we know that in 1990 it was brought from Russia to Hamburg. From Hamburg it went to Connecticut to a restorer, and the Russian government paid for the restoration.
So we have that documentation. Now we're trying to track the shipping out documentation. But this is known now as our Stalin car. We want to say that he ordered it special, but we're not sure if it was directly, to him. It's a great car and a good tour car.
So interesting. And what about this Packard?
This is a 1940 Packard Darrin Victoria on a 180 chassis. It's a very rare car. Howard Dutch Darrin was a flamboyant automobile designer starting in the early 20s. He was also a pilot in the Lafayette Escadrille, the American Air Force for World War I that fought the French. Howard Dutch Darrin started designing these particular cars in 1938 with Clark Gable and Dick Powell and other movie stars. And in late 39, they went to Detroit, and he took his car, it was a Darrin designed one, and parked it out in front of the factory, and was trying to get Packard to, include it in their sales catalog. Well, so many people liked it that Packard acquiesced, and they put it in the 1940 catalog, and then they shifted production from West Hollywood at Coachcraft on Melrose Avenue to the Connors plant in Indiana, where they built the 1940s and the 1941s and the 42 Darrins. Now behind me is a picture of three gentlemen, which is Howard Dutch Darrin on the right, Raymond Dietrich, who designed this particular car behind me, and Alex Tremulous on the left, who did the Tucker automobile. That photo is the only photo of all three gentlemen sitting together at a membership meet for the Packard Club in 1971, which I personally took. With the premier automotive designers of the industry sitting there. And it's a quite interesting story. Dutch had just come out of the hospital prior to that photo from a hernia operation. And we wanted him at that particular meet. And Patty, his wife, said, well, he can't make it. He's had the operation. So I said, no, Patty, we're going to bring him. I called Stan Zimmerman, who has a 1942 Packard ambulance behind me on the other side. He drove down to Santa Monica where he lived, put him on the gurney, rolled him into the ambulance, drove him to the Beverly Hills Hotel, rolled him out up to the stage, and there he sat in that photo for the meet. And then going home, back into the ambulance and back to Santa Monica.
Hi, Earl.
How you doing?
Good. Can you tell us about this Packard? I know it has an interesting body because it's fabric on the outside.
That's correct. It's sort of like a leatherette. This is a 1930 Stutz Wayman-bodied Monte Carlo sedan, one of three that were made, and all three are still in existence. We have this one, which we acquired from the Black Hawk Museum. The other one is at the Heritage Museum in Reno, and the third one is in a private collection in Indiana. What's unusual about the car is that there is no metal anywhere except on the hood and on the fenders. The rest of the body is all wood frame, and it's fabric, and when you touch it, there's a slight gift to the body. So this is a very, very rare car, and we're standing in a climate-controlled room, which is to maintain an even temperature so that we don't have the tacks and the glue separating from the wood frame with expansion and contraction if it's sat outside.
We've got another Packard, a V12 convertible sedan. What's the story with this one?
Well, this is the premier restoration. Glenn Vaughn did the restoration on this car over a number of years. It's been completely disassembled from bumper to bumper, top to bottom, and everything's been rebuilt. This is a true 100-point car. Every time we've had it out, it's been a show winner and a show stopper. It is one magnificent looking car, as you can see. It's the white with the black top and a beautiful gray interior. It is, I don't know how to describe it other than saying you have to ride in the car to appreciate the drive and understand it. And when you look at this one and compare it to the 37 that we have there, they're identical except for little tweaks in the body, and that one is our driver. This is our show car.
It's classy.
It is. It's a classic car.
Earl, this is a Caribbean all-original convertible, and I understand it has 1,751 miles on it.
That's correct. This is the 1955 Caribbean. This car was number 7 off the assembly line. It was bought by Howard Hughes for Jean Peters, his actress wife at the time. And the story goes that they brought it back to California. They took a drive to Malibu. For some reason or other, it was not liked in the drive or whatever it was, and the car was put into storage. And a number of years later, she had her nephew take the car out of storage. He was driving around, and Stan Zimmerman happened to talk with the nephew, and they talked about the car, and the word got back to Gene Peters that he had been talking to people about the car. The car was taken away from him, put back into storage, and a number of years later was advertised for sale very quietly up in Hollywood. And Stan saw the ad and he went and answered it, and it was the same car, and it was at the Howard Hughes warehouse next to a 53 Chrysler that he also had, powder blue, which had been offered for auction at the Peterson 2 years ago for $75,000. Anyways, Stan bought the Caribbean and not the Chrysler, but now he regrets not buying both. And this car is all original. There has been nothing done to it other than new tires put on the car and the license plate. The paint, the top, the interior, the chrome, everything is as was when it came out of the factory. Nothing has changed on this car. It is one rare car.
Earl, this is your 1935 Packard. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, this, like you said, is a 1935 Packard. It's a dual cowl Phaeton. As you can see, it has two windshields, front and rear, and the back portion is called the cowl, and that's the dual windshield in the back, and these are known as the cowls on the car where the windshield sits. That's why they're called dual cowls. How would you like to go for driving it?
I see that you've conveniently put on your driving hat, so I will have to oblige and say yes.
Let's go then.
This definitely feels different from my Honda Civic.
No question about it. This is old technology in a modern day, but it's just as efficient today as it was when it was built, 60 some odd years ago. Car rides, handles, almost as if it was a modern car, just a little bit more cautious, handling a bigger vehicle than a little Honda Civic. It's an experience driving in these old cars and having people come up alongside you and yell out, "What is it? Is it a Chevy?" No, it's not a Chevy, it's a Packard.
And when was it made?
When was it made? How old is it? And what's it worth is another question you always get. And the car has plenty of power, just gets up and goes right with traffic. You just got to shift the gears. Well, there's one thing about these big Super 8s and the V12 Packards, which I'll show you in a moment. You can come to a stop and start out in high gear, and you don't even know that you're in high gear. You think you're in first. There's no shudder to the engine there. Such low-end torque to these cars that they just get up and move away. And there we go. That's from high gear. And that was a honk to tell us that
We got a
thumbs up.
Thank you so much for the ride, Earl. Just for the viewers who are watching, could you give us some information about the museum and how they can come and visit it too?
Of course I can. We're a non-profit museum. We support ourselves by donations only, and we're open every Sunday at 10 to 4 to the public here in Los Angeles in 2134 South Pontius, and that's West Los Angeles. And I hope everybody comes on down to see us. We'd love to have you.
Thank you, Earl, and I'm wrapping it up. I'm Ellen Byars at the Automobile Driving Museum in Los Angeles. Bye.
Bye.